There was a language spoken in the 90s that adults never quite understood. It wasn't English, not exactly. It was something else entirely. Something built from inside jokes and made-up words, from silly voices and secret codes that meant everything to the kids who spoke it and absolutely nothing to anyone else. Looking back now, it's hard to explain what made it all so funny. But it was. It really was. The thing about growing up in the 90s was that entertainment had to be created, not just consumed. There wasn't a screen in every pocket, no endless scroll of content. If something was going to be funny, if joy was going to happen, it had to be made by hand. And so it was. Kids became architects of absurdity, builders of their own ridiculous worlds. It started small, the way most things did back then. Someone would say something funny, maybe by accident. A mispronounced word. A weird sound. And instead of letting it disappear into the air like it probably should have, someone else would repeat it. And then someone else. And suddenly it wasn't just a mistake anymore. It was a thing. A whole thing with rules and variations and a life of its own. There was this one summer where everything became the extreme version of itself. Not just hot. Extremely hot. Not just tired. Extremely tired. It started because of all those commercials, probably. Everything in the 90s was extreme. Extreme sports. Extreme flavors. Extreme colors. So naturally, kids picked it up and ran with it straight into the ground. Extremely ran with it, actually. The word lost all meaning by August. Eating a sandwich became an extreme sandwich eating experience. Walking to the mailbox became extreme mail retrieval. It was stupid. It was so stupid. But every single time someone said it, everyone laughed. That was the thing about the silly language kids created. It didn't have to make sense. In fact, it was often better if it didn't. The more absurd, the more ridiculous, the more it defied any kind of logic, the funnier it became. Adults would overhear these conversations and their faces would scrunch up in confusion. What are they even talking about? But that was part of the magic. It was a language that belonged only to the people who spoke it. The made-up words were everywhere. Someone's older brother would come home from middle school with a new phrase, something that sounded cool and mysterious. And even if nobody knew what it actually meant, it would spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. There was this one word, something that sounded vaguely like schwibble, that somehow became the universal response to everything for an entire month. Want to ride bikes? Schwibble. Did you finish your homework? Schwibble. What do you want for dinner? Schwibble. Parents were baffled. Teachers were concerned. But the kids knew exactly what they were doing. They were building something together, a shared secret that needed no explanation. Sleepovers were where the language really flourished. Something about staying up too late made everything funnier. The silliness would start around 9 o'clock, right after whatever movie had been watched on the VCR. Someone would do an impression, maybe of a teacher or a character from a show, or just a weird voice that popped into their head. And that impression would become the voice of the night. Entire conversations would happen in that voice. Snacks would be requested in that voice. Ghost stories would be told in that voice. And every single time it would send everyone into fits of giggles that were way too loud for whatever time it was. The sleeping bags would be arranged in a circle on the living room floor. And the whispering would begin. Not quiet whispering, though. The kind of loud whispering that defeated the entire purpose of whispering. Someone would start telling a story, something about school or a crush or just something random, and halfway through they'd start laughing at their own story. And then everyone else would start laughing, not even because the story was funny, but because the laughing itself was contagious. It would build and build until someone's mom would appear in the doorway, looking tired, asking everyone to please settle down. And everyone would. For about 5 minutes. Then it would start all over again. Someone would make a sound. Just a weird random sound. A squeak or a pop or something that didn't even have a name. And someone else would try to copy it. And then it would become a game. Who could make the weirdest sound? Who could make everyone laugh the hardest? It was a competition with no prizes and no rules, but everyone played it with complete dedication. There were the songs, too. The ridiculous songs that got invented on long car rides or lazy summer afternoons. Someone would take a song everyone knew, something from the radio or a commercial jingle, and they'd change the words. Not in any clever way. Just silly, random words that rhymed sometimes and didn't other times. And once the new version was created, it would replace the original entirely. For weeks, maybe months, that would be the only version anyone sang. The actual lyrics would be forgotten. Only the silly ones mattered. There was this one song about pizza that got invented during a birthday party. It was sung to the tune of some pop song that was everywhere that summer, but instead of the real words, it was just different types of pizza toppings listed in increasingly ridiculous ways. Pepperoni, extra cheese, mushrooms if feeling adventurous, pineapple if feeling controversial. It made no sense as a song. The rhythm was all wrong. The rhymes didn't work. But it became the official pizza song for that entire group of friends. Years later, even in high school, if someone mentioned pizza, someone else would start humming it. And everyone would remember. The pranks were part of the language, too. Not mean pranks. Nobody was trying to hurt anyone. Just silly, harmless things that were more about the surprise than anything else. The classic, "I'm not touching you" game, where a finger would hover an inch away from someone's arm, while the words were chanted over and over. It was annoying. It was supposed to be annoying. But it was also funny, in that way that only deeply stupid things can be funny. There was the hand game too. The one where someone would hold their hand out and tell a friend to look at it, and when the friend looked, the hand would move up and tap them gently on the chin. Every single time it worked. Every single time the person who fell for it would say, "That doesn't count, do it again," and would immediately fall for it again. It was the simplest trick in the world. But it was also perfect. Because it wasn't about the trick itself. It was about the moment of shared silliness, the mutual agreement to participate in something completely pointless. The secret codes felt so important back then. Kids would spend hours creating elaborate systems for passing notes in class. =1 b = 2, that kind of thing. Or little symbols that represented whole words. A heart meant like. A star meant cool. A squiggly line meant. Well, it meant whatever it needed to mean. The codes were never actually secret. Anyone who looked at them for more than 3 seconds could figure them out. But that wasn't the point. The point was the ritual of it. The folding of the paper into increasingly complex shapes. The careful delivery, passed from desk to desk when the teacher's back was turned. The unfolding, the reading, the writing of a response, the refolding, the passing back. Sometimes the notes weren't even about anything. They were just proof of connection. "I'm bored" written in code. "Me too" written back. It was a conversation that could have happened with a simple glance across the room. But where was the fun in that? The code made it special. The code made it theirs. The made-up games had rules that were constantly changing. For square, but with new penalties every day. Tag, but with safe zones that shifted based on whoever was it. Jump rope, but with rhymes that got sillier and sillier until they weren't even rhymes anymore, just random words strung together. The games weren't really about winning. They were about the negotiation. The democracy of play. Someone would suggest a new rule and everyone would debate it. Too complicated. Not fair. Doesn't make sense. Okay, fine, but only if we also add this other rule. And somehow, through all the chaos, everyone would agree and the game would continue. There was this one game that involved a tennis ball and absolutely no tennis whatsoever. It was called something that probably sounded cool at the time but makes no sense now. Maybe Wall Ball Extreme, or Super Bounce Challenge, or something equally 90-ish. The rules were simple but also completely arbitrary. Someone would throw the ball at a wall. Someone else would try to catch it. If they caught it, they got a point. If they didn't, they had to run and touch the wall before someone else grabbed the ball and threw it at them. Hit by the ball meant something. No one could ever quite remember what it meant. Start over. Lose a point. Switch teams. The rules changed depending on who was yelling the loudest. But the game was never really about the ball. It was about the running and the shouting and the laughing. It was about that one kid who always threw the ball way too hard and had to be reminded constantly to take it easy. It was about the arguments over whether someone was safe or not. It was about the sun getting lower and lower and someone's mom calling from a doorway that dinner was ready, but nobody wanting to stop playing because the game was just getting good. The voices were endless. The silly voices. Kids would slip into them without even thinking about it. The high-pitched voice for when something was cute or exciting. The deep, dramatic voice for when something was serious or scary. The robot voice for when technology was involved. The accent that wasn't really any accent, just a vague collection of sounds that seemed foreign and therefore fancy. Every situation had its appropriate voice. There was one friend who did this voice that was supposed to be a news reporter. She'd narrate everything like it was breaking news. And now walking toward the refrigerator, hoping to find something good. It's Sarah. What will she find? Will it be leftover pizza? Will it be fruit snacks? The tension is unbearable. It was so dumb, but it made getting a snack feel like an adventure. It made the ordinary feel special. The impressions of teachers were a whole category of entertainment. Every teacher had their thing. The way they said certain words. The way they stood at the front of the class. The way they handed back tests. And kids would practice these impressions like they were preparing for a performance. At lunch, someone would slip into their best Mrs. Johnson voice, adjusting invisible glasses and saying, "People, let's settle down now." And everyone would crack up. Not because it was mean. Mrs. Johnson was actually pretty nice. But because the impression was so specific, so perfectly captured, that it felt like a magic trick. Even the way kids said goodbye became a language of its own. Not just bye. That was too simple. It was see ya. Or later. Or catch you later. Or some combination of all of those stretched out into something longer and more musical. See ya later alligator was still hanging around from older generations, but it had evolved. After a while, crocodile. Give a hug, ladybug. Out the door, dinosaur. Kids would make up new ones on the spot. They didn't have to rhyme. They didn't have to make sense. They just had to feel right. Phone calls had their own language too. Before caller ID, before texting, before any way to know who was on the other end until they spoke. Answering the phone was an event. And kids had their little routines. The way they'd say hello. The way they'd call for their parents if the call wasn't for them. The way they'd stretch the phone cord across the kitchen to get some privacy, which was impossible because phone cords only stretched so far and everyone could still hear everything. But the real fun was when friends called each other. The conversations would start normal enough. "Hey, it's me." "Hey, what are you doing?" "Nothing." "Wanna do something?" "I don't know." And then, somehow, the conversation would drift into silliness. Someone would start talking in one of the voices. Someone else would join in. Pretty soon the actual conversation was forgotten, and it was just two kids making each other laugh through a phone line, stretching that curly cord as far as it would go, trying to find a corner of the house where nobody else could hear them be completely ridiculous. There were the group chants too. Things that got said in unison, usually for no reason. Someone would start it and everyone else would automatically join in. Maybe it was something from a commercial. Maybe it was something from a movie. Maybe it was just a phrase that sounded good when a bunch of kids said it at the same time. The point wasn't the words. The point was the collective voice. The feeling of being part of something, even if that something was incredibly silly. At birthday parties, when the cake came out, there was always that moment of anticipation. The candles would be lit. The lights would be dimmed. And then the singing would start. But not just happy birthday. Oh no, there were verses. Unofficial verses that every kid knew. Happy birthday to you, you live in a zoo, you look like a monkey, and you smell like one too. Mean? Maybe. But also affectionate in a weird way. And the birthday kid would be laughing, everyone would be laughing, and then there'd be the moment of blowing out the candles and making a wish and everyone would cheer. And then someone, usually the same someone every time, would start the countdown. Speech. 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 And the birthday kid would have to say something, anything, while everyone watched. Usually it was just thanks for coming or something equally generic. But sometimes someone would get silly with it. They'd thank each person individually with increasingly ridiculous descriptions. Thanks to Tommy for always being extremely extreme. Thanks to Sarah for being the best at making weird sounds. Thanks to Mike for being tall. And everyone would laugh and clap like it was the greatest speech ever delivered. The sleepovers had rituals that felt sacred. There was always the discussion about what movie to watch. Everyone would suggest their favorite, and somehow through a process that involved way too much debate, a decision would be made. Then there was the claiming of spots. Who got the couch? Who got the sleeping bag closest to the TV? Who had to sleep near the bathroom, which was fine actually because then bathroom trips in the middle of the night weren't scary. Once the lights were out and the movie was playing, someone would always start the whispering commentary, predicting what would happen next, pointing out funny details, quoting lines right before they happened, and someone else would whisper back, and then someone else, until the movie became background noise to the real entertainment, which was just friends being silly in the dark. There was always that one person who would fall asleep first. and everyone else would try so hard to be quiet so they wouldn't wake them up. But the trying to be quiet somehow made everything funnier. Every little sound became hilarious. Someone would shift in their sleeping bag, and it would make a crinkling noise and everyone would start giggling. And then someone would say, "Shoo," which would make everyone giggle harder. And the sleeping person would stir and everyone would freeze, holding their breath, until the person settled back into sleep. And then the giggling would start all over again. The morning after a sleepover had its own language. Everyone would wake up groggy and disoriented. Someone's hair would be sticking straight up. Someone else would have pillow marks on their face. And the silly voices would come back, but slower this time, sleepier. Breakfast would be weird. Someone's mom would make pancakes or eggs or whatever, and everyone would eat quietly, still half asleep, until someone said something funny and the energy started building again. The walk home after a sleepover always felt strange. Everything looked different in the morning light. The same streets that felt magical at night looked ordinary now, but there was still that warm feeling, that sense of belonging, of having been part of something special, even if that something was just staying up too late and being ridiculous. At school, the inside jokes multiplied. They'd start from the smallest things. Someone would trip over nothing in the hallway, and from that moment on, that spot in the hallway was cursed. Everyone would dramatically avoid it. Someone would point at it and say, "Watch out for the danger zone," in a serious voice, and everyone would nod solemnly like they were discussing something actually important. The joke would last weeks, maybe months. Teachers would walk past having no idea that a completely mundane spot on the floor had become legendary. There were code words for everything, ways to communicate without actually saying what was being communicated. If someone said they were going to the library, it might actually mean they were going to the library, but it might also mean something completely different, some kind of adventure or plan that adults didn't need to know about. The meaning depended on the tone, the context, the little eyebrow raise that came with it. The lunchroom was its own universe of silly language. Trading was a complex negotiation. "I'll give you my fruit snacks for your pudding cup." "No way, pudding cups are worth way more." "Fine, fruit snacks and half my sandwich." "What kind of sandwich?" The debates were intense. The stakes felt high. A good trade could make your whole day. A bad trade would haunt you for weeks. And then there were the food combinations that shouldn't have worked but somehow did. Or at least everyone pretended they did. Mixing chocolate milk and regular milk to create super milk. Crushing up chips and putting them on a sandwich for extra crunch. Dipping French fries in ice cream, which was actually delicious, and anyone who said otherwise was lying. These combinations became legendary. They were proof of creativity, of rebellion, of refusing to eat food the boring, normal way. The playground was where language became physical. The complicated handshakes that kids would invent. Not just a simple high five. No, these were routines. Slap, slap, bump, snap, something with elbows, something with hands behind the back, ending with both people pointing at each other and making a clicking sound with their tongues. Every friend group had their own version. Learning someone's handshake was like being accepted into a club. Messing up the handshake was embarrassing, but also funny, because messing up meant you had to start over, and starting over meant more chances to laugh at how complicated the whole thing was. The monkey bars were the site of endless conversations that happened upside down. There was something about hanging by your knees that made everything funnier. Maybe it was the blood rushing to your head. Maybe it was the sky being where the ground should be. But kids would hang there, faces getting red, talking about the most random things. What superpower would be the best? Would you rather fight 100 duck-sized horses or one horse-sized duck? If you could only eat one food for the rest of your life, what would it be? These questions were taken very seriously. The debates were passionate. And inevitably, someone would hang there too long and have to flip down quickly before they passed out, and everyone would laugh. The swings were for the dreamers. For the kids who wanted to go higher and higher until it felt like flying. And there was always someone who would say they could go so high the swing would go all the way around the bar. No one ever did, of course. But the dream was beautiful. The possibility was enough. There was this game on the swings where someone would jump off at the highest point, just launch themselves into the air and try to land on their feet. It was dangerous. It was probably not allowed. But it was also thrilling. And everyone would watch and gasp and then cheer if the landing was successful. And if someone fell, which happened sometimes, everyone would rush over to make sure they were okay. And usually they were. just a scrape or a bruise. And they'd get up, dust themselves off and say something like, "That was awesome," even though it clearly wasn't. But that was the language. The agreement to see everything as an adventure. The tire swing was for spinning. Just spinning and spinning until the world was a blur and everyone felt dizzy and sick but also amazing. Someone would twist the tire around and around, winding it up tight, and then let go. And the kids on the tire would spin, screaming with laughter, until they stumbled off and collapsed on the grass, the world still spinning even though they were standing still. Inside jokes could come from anywhere. A funny typo in a past note. The way someone sneezed once that sounded like a cartoon character. The time someone wore two different shoes to school by accident. These moments would be referenced forever. Years later, someone would just say the keyword, the little trigger, and everyone would start laughing. Trying to explain the joke to someone who wasn't there was impossible. You just had to be there. And that was true. You did have to be there. Because the joke wasn't really about what happened. It was about the shared experience. The memory of being young and silly together. The birthday party games had their own language. Musical chairs was always more intense than it needed to be. The music would stop and there'd be a scramble, everyone diving for a chair, and someone would end up sitting on someone else's lap because there weren't enough chairs, and there'd be an argument about whether that counted or not. Pin the tail on the donkey was always chaos because kids would spin each other way too hard and someone would end up pinning the tail on the wall or the ceiling or another kid. Red light, green light always had that one kid who would insist they weren't moving when they clearly were, and the debate about it would derail the whole game. But the best part of birthday parties was always the part without structure. After the games were done and the cake was eaten and there was that hour or so before parents started showing up. Kids would just exist together in that space, making up new games, playing pretend, building blanket forts, having conversations that jumped from topic to topic with no logical connection, laughing at things that wouldn't be funny tomorrow but were hilarious right now. The shared television experiences created their own language too. On Monday mornings, everyone would talk about what they watched over the weekend. If a show had a big moment, something shocking or funny or exciting, everyone would reference it constantly. The catchphrases would get repeated. The dramatic moments would be reenacted. Kids would argue about what was going to happen next. Theories would be developed. Sides would be taken. It wasn't just watching TV. It was a communal experience that extended beyond the screen. Saturday morning cartoons were a religion. Waking up early, pouring a giant bowl of cereal, sitting cross-legged in front of the TV in pajamas. The lineup was sacred. Everyone knew what came on when. And at school on Monday, there'd be discussions about the episodes. What was funny? What was cool? What was unexpected? Kids who didn't have cable would ask their friends to tell them what happened on the cable shows. And the retelling would be dramatic, full of gestures and voices and probably some exaggeration. But accuracy wasn't the point. The point was the sharing. The commercials became part of the language too. Jingles would get stuck in everyone's head. Kids would sing them at random moments. The funny commercials would be quoted constantly. Someone would say the catchphrase and everyone would laugh and say it back. It was free entertainment. It was something everyone had in common. It didn't matter if you were rich or poor, cool or awkward. Everyone saw the same commercials. Everyone knew the same jingles. It was a universal language. The slang from TV shows would seep into regular conversation. Someone on a show would say something cool and by the next week, every kid in school was saying it. As if. Talk to the hand. Whatever. All that and a bag of chips. These phrases would spread like wildfire. They'd be everywhere for a few months and then disappear completely. But while they lasted, they were essential. Not using them meant being out of touch. Using them wrong meant being mocked. But using them just right? That meant being cool. The ridiculous fashion was its own form of communication. The butterfly clips that covered every inch of available hair. The platform shoes that made walking dangerous. The choker necklaces that served no purpose except looking edgy. The jelly bracelets stacked up arms. The slap bracelets that were banned in some schools because kids kept slapping each other too hard. These weren't just accessories. They were statements. They were ways of showing who you were or who you wanted to be. And everyone understood the language. The specific combination of clips and bracelets and shoes told a story. There were the trends that came and went quickly. Suddenly everyone had to have a certain toy or a certain type of pen or a certain brand of backpack. It didn't matter if it was practical. It mattered that everyone else had it. And if you had it too, you were part of the group. You spoke the language. The ways kids decorated their space was part of the language too. Bedrooms were covered in posters of bands and movie stars and athletes. Not because the posters were particularly beautiful or meaningful, but because they were declarations. This is what I care about. This is who I am. Walking into a friend's room meant reading their walls, understanding what was important to them based on what they chose to display. Lockers at school became tiny galleries, mirrors to check your hair between classes, photos of friends taped inside, magazine cutouts, inspirational quotes that were actually just lyrics from songs, little notes that friends had passed during class. Everything crammed into that small metal space. It wasn't organized. It wasn't beautiful, but it was personal. It was a little piece of self in a school full of rules and structure. The notes passed in class were masterpieces of efficiency. Folded into tiny triangles or squares, they could be hidden in a palm or slipped into a textbook. The writing was usually tiny, cramming as much conversation as possible onto a small piece of paper. The topics ranged from serious to completely silly. Do you think Mr. Peterson is wearing the same tie as yesterday? Yes. That's so gross. I know. These weren't important conversations, but they were necessary. They were proof of connection in a place that often felt disconnecting. And there were the doodles. The margins of notebooks filled with designs and drawings and random words written in different styles. Bubble letters. Block letters. Letters that looked like they were dripping. Hearts and stars and spirals. Band names written over and over. Crush names written in code. Little games of tic-tac-toe played during boring lectures. The notebooks were supposed to be for learning, but they became something else. They became journals of boredom and creativity and friendship. The group projects were always an adventure in communication. There'd be the one kid who wanted to do everything perfectly, the one kid who wanted to do nothing, the one kid who had great ideas but terrible follow-through. And somehow, usually in the final hours before the project was due, it would all come together. The language of group projects was negotiation and compromise and last-minute panic and relief when it was finally done. But even in the stress, there was silliness. Someone would make a joke about the poster board being too big or too small. Someone else would start drawing little designs in the corners of the presentation. Someone would practice their part in a funny voice just to make everyone laugh. And by the time the project was presented to the class, there'd be inside jokes embedded in it. Little references that only the group understood. The teacher would look confused. The class would look bored. But the group would be trying not to laugh, proud of their secret language hidden in plain sight. The end-of-year yearbook signings were a ritual of friendship. Everyone would pass their yearbooks around, collecting signatures and messages from classmates. Some people would write long, heartfelt notes. Others would just write, "Have a great summer." But the best were the ones that referenced the inside jokes, the silly moments, the shared memories that wouldn't make sense to anyone else. Remember when we made up that song about pizza? Remember the time you fell off the swing? Remember our secret handshake? These messages were time capsules, little reminders that once we were young and silly together. And it was wonderful. Looking back now, it's amazing how much joy was created from nothing. No fancy technology. No endless entertainment options. Just kids and their imaginations and their willingness to be completely ridiculous together. The language they created, all those inside jokes and silly voices and made-up games, wasn't just entertainment. It was connection. It was belonging. It was the feeling of being understood. That's what made growing up in the 90s special. Not the specific toys or shows or trends, though those were part of it. It was the way kids built their own world. A world where silliness was celebrated, where being weird was okay, where the funniest moments were the ones that couldn't be explained to anyone who wasn't there. It was a time when laughter was the most important currency, when making your friends laugh felt like the greatest achievement. The language of laughter, the language of shared absurdity, created bonds that lasted. Even now, decades later, running into an old friend from those days brings it all back. The inside jokes, the silly voices, the memories of being young and ridiculous together. And maybe one of those old phrases will slip out, and both people will laugh. Not because the phrase is funny on its own, but because it's a key to a time when life was simpler and sillier and absolutely beautiful. Those were the days. The silly, wonderful, weird, beautiful days. And if you enjoyed this little journey back to that time, it would mean the world if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. There are more memories to share, more stories to tell, more reasons to smile about the past. Thanks for listening and thanks for remembering with me.